basis of causal causation.
Welcome back. This is the second video on the causation long essay question. In the first video, we focused on how to read that prompt, how to identify those critical words, how then to brainstorm either some causes and or effects, depending on what they ask for, and then ultimately how to take that list of causes and effects that you have and to put it together into a thesis statement. Now, in terms of the LEQ, the ideal LEQ essay has 5 paragraphs. And in the first paragraph, you're going to include contextualization, which we'll talk more about in a second, and also it will have a thesis statement. And then your second body paragraph, you're going to address one of hopefully the 3 causes and or effects that you've identified. And then you'll have a second body paragraph on another cause and or effect, and then a third body paragraph on a third cause and or effect. And again, one of these, or maybe 2 of these paragraphs, should also be qualifying paragraphs, meaning they should challenge the argument that you're initially trying to lay out. And then finally, the 5th paragraph should be your connection, or sometimes referred to as the synthesis. You should start with that, and then you should restate your thesis, and we'll have more on connection and synthesis in a second. So for your second, third, and fourth paragraphs, they should ideally follow this structure. You should begin with a topic sentence, and then you should include a few sentences that describe some evidence, and then you should conclude each body paragraph, if you can, with some analysis. So let's start with the topic sentences. Topic sentences should identify one of the various claims from your thesis. So there's a template for this. Again, it's 1, if there's a spice theme, you should focus on what spice theme, and then cause or effect of, and then the event was effect A or cause A. So let's look at an example again. Evaluate the extent to which the environment was affected by humans' transition to agriculture in the period 8000 BCE to 600 BCE. And so it's focusing on the effects of the humans' transition to agriculture, and specifically they want to know about environmental effects. So if we were to write a topic sentence in response to this prompt, we would write something like, 1 environmental effect of the transition to agriculture was, let's just say, the use of water. Now, we talked about that one though in the last video. The problem with just using a phrase like the use of water is it's not clear enough, it's not specific enough. And so it's really important that when you first are drafting and creating your thesis, that you identify claims that have a level of specificity and clarity to them. Now, is it okay for you just to take what you wrote in your thesis and then rewrite it in your topic sentence? Yes, as long as what you wrote in your thesis is solid and clear, then that's okay. So for example, a topic sentence like this: 1 environmental effect of the transition to agriculture was that humans developed new water control systems. A lot more clear, a lot more specific. So that's what we're shooting for with our topic sentences. Now look at this prompt. Evaluate the extent to which the external factors caused imperial decline and collapse in the period circa 600 BCE to 600 CE. Now if we have our template in our mind, we could say, all right, well, 1, in this case they're asking about external factors. So 1 external factor that caused imperial decline and collapse was cause A. Whatever that cause is, be it maybe the spread of diseases or the invasion by pest or nomadic peoples. Again, we may get to then some later qualifying body paragraphs where it's important to then make that transition. So for example, in addition to the external factors, many internal factors also led to the decline and collapse of classical empires, such as, cause B. Maybe it's the growing gap between the rich and the poor that is going to lead to these internal rebellions.
What can you prove? Where's your evidence, huh?
So on the LEQ, there are 2 possible points for evidence. The rubric states the first point, you must provide specific examples of evidence relevant to the topic. But the College Board doesn't state exactly how many pieces of evidence that you need. So we're going to try and shoot for at least 5 pieces of specific evidence, which ideally is around at a minimum kind of 2 to 3 per body paragraph. So what counts as evidence? Any key terms, any dates, any events, any peoples, any place, anything that you can remember that relates to the topic counts as evidence. Maybe it's something from your notes, anything from the textbook, any historical facts at all that you can generate counts as evidence. So whenever you're stuck here, you think like, oh, I gotta have some more evidence. Ask yourself these questions. Who, what, when, where, how? Those types of questions will generate evidence. And so maybe you're sitting there going, well, I remember this particular thing, but I don't necessarily know what date it is, but I have some rough estimate. Should you maybe try and include a date? Yeah, absolutely, because you can't get points taken off for being wrong, and this is really important. So if you have maybe some rough idea, it's always better to just take a shot at adding more evidence. This is the part of the essay where I like to say, you try and back the truck up, beep, 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 and just dump as much onto the page as possible. It's a good idea to use for example to get yourself started. So once you've written that topic sentence, the next word can always be, so for example, and then try and provide one example. And then later, when you have a second example, you can say, a second example is, and then hopefully maybe you have a third example. So let's look at this prompt again. Evaluate the extent to which the environment was affected by humans' transition to agriculture. Well, what if my topic sentence was, one environmental effect of the transition to agriculture was the use of irrigation systems. For example, the Egyptians built irrigation systems on the Nile River, while the Mesopotamians constructed irrigation systems on the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Both societies used irrigation systems to supply water to crops. Now, do you think this would get the 1 point? Because it provided some clear, specific examples that are relevant to the topic. I would argue probably yes. It's not great, but it certainly provides 2 examples, one being the irrigation systems developed on the Nile River in Egypt, and one the irrigation systems developed by the Mesopotamians on the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. So I think that as long as this student was continuing on with this kind of level of evidence, I think this would probably earn 1 point for the evidence. But it's not the greatest thing that's ever been written. So
Yeah, it's time to take it to the next level.
There is, again, another evidence point to be earned. So how do you take our use of evidence to the next level? And we do this by not only having evidence that's of a sufficient quality and quantity, but also then using it to support an argument. So take a look at this one. Your topic sentence here is, one environmental effect of the transition to agriculture was that humans developed new water control systems. Now notice the difference between my last topic sentence, which was specifically about irrigation. Now I've broadened the scope of my claim by framing my claim as new water control systems rather than just the more narrow claim of irrigation. Now notice what I can do now with the evidence. Nearly all of the first civilizations arose in river valleys near readily available sources of water. In Mesopotamia and Egypt, humans constructed irrigation systems to divert water from the Tigris, Euphrates, and Nile rivers to nearby fields. In ancient China, where the Yellow River flooded unpredictably, the state ordered the construction of dams to prevent flooding. In the Indus River Valley, water control systems were built to channel water into sewers and public baths located in cities like Mohenjo-Daro. So do you see how more robust the evidence that I'm providing is? And so this most likely would qualify for that second point. So do you see how I'm also following the rule of 3? In this sentence here, I'm talking about irrigation systems. In this second sentence, I'm talking about the dams that were built by the Chinese. And in the third sentence, I'm talking about sewers and public baths. I'm also using evidence from 3 different locations. And all of this would earn you that second supporting evidence point. All right, so let's look at this prompt. Again, evaluate the extent to which external factors caused imperial decline and collapse in the period circa 600 BCE to 600 CE. Now, what I want you to do is take this topic sentence, one external factor that caused imperial decline and collapse was, and I want you to complete that thought, and then I want you to write some evidence. So for example, and then I want you to complete that. So take a minute, pause the video, and try and identify a few different examples. So you should hopefully have maybe one example, a second example, and hopefully maybe even a third example that can help support the claim that you're making.
Analysis, Mr. Spark.
All right, so in every body paragraph that you want to try and also end the paragraph with analysis. Now, analysis provides the reason for the cause and or effect. So we talked about in the evidence, answering those questions, the who, what, when, where, how questions. Analysis really answers the why. Why did this cause happen? Why was this the effect? So this is possibly worth 1 point for complex understanding. So again, it's worth taking a shot. Now be explicit. And so when you write analysis, you should practice just forcing yourself to write the reason for this was because. So the reason why diseases spread during the classical era was because, or the reason why pastoral nomadic people invaded empires was because, or the reason why there were a number of rebellions within empires was because. So be explicit. Force yourself to finish and complete that thought by writing the reason for whatever your cause or effect was because. Now let's look at this one again. Evaluate the extent to which the environment was affected by humans' transition to agriculture. So if I were to write analysis, I might write something like this. The reason humans developed water control systems was because they needed water to increase their food production, to support growing population areas, and to avoid the destructive power of the rivers they lived nearby. So force yourself to write analysis by writing the reason for whatever your cause or whatever your effect was, and try and answer that question. So you practice it. How about evaluate the extent to which external factors caused imperial decline and collapse? So you should practice, again, the reason for whatever you've identified in your topic sentence was because, and complete that thought. And that's analysis. All right, in the next video, we will focus on the other major components to the LEQ essay, contextualization, which goes in the introductory paragraph, and then the connection, which goes in that concluding paragraph. Thanks for watching.
Causes of causal causation.
Welcome back. This is the second video on the causation long essay. Ultimately, how to take that list of causes and effects that you have and to put it together into a thesis statement. Now, in terms of the LEQ, the ideal LEQ essay has 5 paragraphs. And then you'll have a second body paragraph on another cause and or effect, and then a third body paragraph on a third cause and or effect. And again, one of these, or maybe 2 of these paragraphs, should also be qualifying paragraphs, meaning and in the first paragraph, you're going to include contextualization, which we'll talk more about in a second, and also it will have a thesis statement. And then your second body paragraph, you're going to address one of hopefully the 3 causes and or effects that you've identified. A question. In the first video, we focused on how to read that prompt, how to identify those critical words, how then to brainstorm either some causes and or effects, depending on what they ask for, and then